Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you guys how to make this beautiful two-tier emoji filled cake with a wonderful 3D emoji on top. Also, don't forget to click here and subscribe to my channel. To start off, I bake 2 vanilla cakes in 2 8-inch round pans and 2 strawberry cakes in 2 6-inch round pans. And these took about 25 to 28 minutes to bake. Once the cakes have completely cooled, I go ahead and remove them from the pans and I begin to level off the top so that we have a straight and even cake layer on top. After I leveled them, one of my strawberry cake layers was taller than the others, so I cut it in half so that I'm left with 3 separate layers. Now I'm going to drizzle all my cakes with some simple syrup to keep them nice and moist. Then I begin assembling the cakes by adding my first cake layer onto the cake board, and I use a little buttercream as glue so that the cake sticks to the cake board and doesn't move. Then I continue on filling the cake with buttercream. In this case, I'm using cookies and cream buttercream, and then I go ahead and add the other cake layer on top. Now, since there's a gap in between the cakes, I'm going to grab a piping bag full of the cookies and cream buttercream, and I'm just going to insert that in there and fill in all the gaps. Then using my offset spatula, I smooth that around the cake, and then I begin the crumb coat using regular vanilla buttercream. I give it a thin layer of the vanilla buttercream coating, then I refrigerate it and give it a second layer of vanilla buttercream. I do the same thing with my strawberry cake, except this one is going to get covered in chocolate buttercream. So I go ahead and fill it with the chocolate buttercream, and then I add the other cake on top, fill it with some more buttercream, add the final cake on top, and begin to give this a crumb coat. Once I'm done with the first coat, I refrigerate it and I give it a second coat of vanilla buttercream this time. The reason why I'm using vanilla buttercream as the final coat is because I don't want the dark color of the chocolate to seep through the light color of fondant in which we're going to be covering this cake with. Once the cakes have been refrigerated and the buttercream is set on those, we're going to get ready to cover them in fondant. So I'm going to start with my bigger cake tier, which is the vanilla cake with cookies and cream buttercream, and I'm going to cover this in black fondant. I'm using a fondant smoother to smooth out the tops and sides of the cake just so the fondant is nice and smooth on there and sticks to the buttercream. And then I'm going to use my pizza cutter to trim off the excess fondant from the bottom of the cake. Now we're going to cover our strawberry cake, which is the smaller cake, in a nice light pink fondant. Once again, using my fondant smoother to help smooth out the sides and top of the cake, I'm going to smooth out the fondant, and then using my pizza cutter, I'm going to trim off the excess fondant around the bottom of the cake. Using the scraps of the pink fondant that were left over, I am rolling out these medium-sized, kind of gumball sized balls, a little smaller than a gumball, but I'm rolling them out, and then these are going to be the border for the bottom cake. And I forgot to add the dowels to the cake before covering it in fondant, but no worries, you can still add the dowels once it's covered in fondant. So what I'm going to do is add about 5 dowels, and then the top cake layer, of course, is going to be covering these, so you won't be able to see them. But either way, they're going to get trimmed to size, so you won't be able to see them. Now I'm going to add 1 long dowel through the center, and then that's going to go under the hole that's under the cake board, under the top tier cake. So this wooden dowel is going to go right through the top tier, and it's going to be a support to help keep both of the layers together. Now using some yellow fondant, I'm going to create those little gumball looking fondant balls, and I'm going to place these as a border around the bottom of the pink cake. Now here I have some emojis which I printed on edible sugar sheets, and these were printed with edible ink. So A lot of people ask me questions about how I do this. Well, you need to buy an edible ink printer. Once you use this printer, you can only use it for edible inks. And so the edible inks are basically like food colors, but they're in ink cartridges, which are used for the printers. And then these are sugar sheets, which basically taste like frosting. This is 100% edible. So I printed these images on the edible sheets, and these are a couple of the complex emojis. I'm going to make some by hand also, but these are the more complex ones, and I'm just going to cut them off. And the back of these is basically, it's basically paper, but it's a thicker form of edible paper, and you just wet them slightly. If you wet them too much, they will dissolve. So I just wet them slightly and they stick to the fondant. And actually, if this is your first time using them, I would recommend wetting the fondant instead of wetting the actual paper. So I take that back, wet the fondant, and then wet it slightly though, not too much. And then you just stick this onto there. And as you can see, that's what I'm doing. I'm just wetting the fondant a little bit, and then I'm sticking the edible image onto the fondant. And I'm just adding these randomly. There's no specific pattern. Like I said, I printed out more of the complex emojis, so I have like the little poop and the cake and the balloon and the little girl and the doggy and the monkeys, and I'm just sticking these randomly throughout the cake. And I'm also going to show you guys how to make some emojis out of fondant. So here I have some yellow fondant, which I rolled out, and I'm using a circle little cup. You can use anything circular depending on how big you want the emoji to be. And I'm just cutting out the little emoji faces. So for the first emoji face, I'm going to do the face that has the winky eye and it's blowing a heart kiss. So I have some black fondant, and what I'm going to do is cut out a V shape using my X-Acto knife. Make sure that it's small enough to fit on the face, and this V shape is going to be slanted and it's going to look like a winky eye. Then for the lips, it looks like it's blowing a kiss, so what I'm going to do is just create a small little tube of fondant, and then I'm just going to roll it out to look kind of like a W, like a slanted W, I guess, and this is going to be the kissy lips. Then I'm going to roll out a really small ball of fondant, and that's going to be the other eye, and in the center of that I'm going to add a really small white dot of fondant. And for the heart kiss, I have some red fondant, and I'm just going to freeform a really small heart and place that right by the side of the lips, and it's going to look as if the emoji is blowing a heart kiss. Now for the second emoji, I'm going to do the one that's like super cheesy, so the eyes are kind of closed and then the mouth is like super wide open and has like perfectly straight teeth. I make the mouth using a white fondant rectangle, and then using an edible food marker, I am going to draw in the straight teeth. Now I'm going to make the cool emoji, which is the emoji with the glasses. So I'm going to draw in his eyebrows. He has one eyebrow that's like kind of more raised than the other. And then out of black fondant, I'm going to cut out two triangle shapes, and these are going to be the shades. And I'm actually not happy with how the eyebrows look, so I'm going to remake those using a thin strip of black fondant for each eyebrow, and I'm also going to use a thin strip of black fondant for the mouth. For my final face emoji, I did the cry laugh emoji, which is crying and laughing, and I just drew in the eyebrows and the eyes, and I added a half circle for the mouth because the mouth is like super wide open laughing. Then I did a thin triangle. Oh my god, I'm sorry, I don't even know my shapes today. I did a thin rectangle for the teeth, for the top part of the teeth, and then I did a small strip for the tongue out of red fondant. For the tears, I have this light teal color, and I'm going to create a tear shape, and then I am going to add a little strip of white fondant in the center of each tear, and then these are going to go right under his eyes on the side of his mouth. Now I'm going to make a couple of heart emojis. So I'm going to make the plain red heart. So I have some red fondant, and then I have this small heart shape cutter, and what I'm going to do is just cut out the shape of the hearts. But the emoji hearts are a little more pointy, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand that peak in the center of each heart by just cutting out a nice little V shape and making the heart a little more elongated. I'm going to repeat what I just did with the red heart with a hot pink heart, and I'm going to make the sparkly heart emoji. So I have my heart, and then I'm going to grab some yellow fondant, and I'm going to create two diamonds, one small one and one that's a little bigger, and I'm going to place one on either side diagonally of the heart. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the fondant emoji faces and fondant heart emojis that we just made throughout the cake. I made sure to leave gaps throughout the cake when I added the printed on emojis. So now I'm going to go ahead and add these fondant emojis. Now for the final heart emoji, I made a smaller hot pink heart, and then I'm going to do the one that has like these little sound waves around it. So I'm just cutting out small strips, and I'm placing 3 strips on each corner of the heart. Now to finish and top off the cake, what I have here is a foam ball, and you can do this out of gum paste. I just didn't have enough time to let the gum paste sit for about 3 days, and I didn't want it to be a really heavy ball on top of the cake. So I'm using a foam ball. It's a great alternative, and what I'm going to do is just cover this with a little bit of buttercream and a little bit of water. You can use piping gel or royal icing also, and I'm just covering the ball with this so that the fondant has something to stick on, and we're going to completely cover this ball in yellow fondant. Using my hands, I'm going to mold the fondant around the ball, and I'm also going to roll it around on the surface just so that it gives us a nice smooth look on the fondant. To add this as a topper on the cake, I'm going to insert a long dowel through the center of the cake. Remember, we already had a dowel under the pink cake, so make sure that it's not super long. And so I measured to see about where it hits the other dowel, and I trimmed off the excess. So I'm going to insert this in there, and then you want to make sure that it doesn't poke out through the top of the foam ball. So make sure that it's a little shorter than the top of the foam ball. I'm going to go ahead and add the foam ball right through there. To finish off the emoji cake topper, I'm going to do the one with the heart eyes. So I'm rolling out some red fondant, and I'm just going to cut out 2 heart shapes. These are going to be the eyes. And then I place these right where I want the front of the emoji face to be. Then I grab some black fondant, and I cut off a kind of half circle shape, and this is going to be the big smiley mouth. And this beautiful emoji filled cake is complete. We have all the wonderful emojis. We have some printed on emojis and some emojis that we made out of fondant. And of course, to top off the cake, we have this giant 3D emoji on top. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned next week for another episode. Bye bye.